in our minutes, and I have a handout when we get to that point so that you can read it. But there are going to be hopefully three action items. Are there other adjustments to the agenda? Anybody? So our first action item, or first agenda item, approval of full study committee meeting minutes for March 8th. Is there a motion for that? To approve. So moved. March. Thank you. In a second?
Second.
I was getting confused with the March 9th and the and I wrote this. And a motion to, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And a motion to accept the communications subcommittee notes from March 9th. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
In a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. And Mark, did you just want to remind us of the importance of our meeting minutes, the commercial article?
Everybody probably heard, there was Public Information Act request filed by a Republican legislature from Wyndham Southeast, I think is the Unified District, Act 46 committee. He requested all records from the Act 46 committee, all emails, all writings, all recordings, all everything. So all little joke emails and all that stuff, it's all, everything is going on. So we take the meeting minutes here and all that stuff, so I have no fears about that, but just, it's interesting that once one person does it, I think it becomes a.
So I just applaud our committee for our conduct.
You omitted one key fact,
What?
that he's also the school board chair on one of the constituent districts.
He's inside the circle.
Yeah.
Oh, he's not, that's probably not.
Yeah.
So I just want to commend all of our committee members for our good conduct throughout our meetings. You know, our emails have been just for information, letting us know about minutes coming up, and we take our meetings coming up, and we've taken good minutes, even our subcommittee meetings. So we have a very good public record of our work. So thank you, everybody, for that commitment.
So you always use your CSSU.
Yes.
Once again.
Hacks or no hacks?
Hacks or no hacks?
So we have a few discussion items, and we'll start with the financial updates. Is that good? Jean and Bob,
Yeah.
do you want to lead that?
So, last time we had this discussion, this committee had decided that, let me take a step back. So the financials that are in the report right now were done on the state model. It assumed a 2% increase in spending and a -1% on equalized pupil count. That's what we've been running with since we got the model in November. About, I don't know, in January, this committee said, you know, that's all well and good, but that does not comprehend the bond that passed in Shelburne or the bond that's being contemplated in Williston, and that we don't want to run into a situation where people are saying, hey, we voted for this thing and now what's this bait and switch? So we'd like to include the bonds in the financials. So we took a stab at that, a couple of stabs at that. And I think I told you last meeting that the numbers did not make sense to me. I was very uncomfortable with them. And as it turns out, we broke the model. Right?
It's a good summary description,
Yeah.
executive summary.
So Agency of Education said, you can't use those numbers to model. It doesn't work with that. It doesn't work. So
But the model up to a certain percentage works.
it caps everything at a 5% increase incorrectly. So since our increase was, remember, we added a percent of spending to take care of the bonds, so that's plus 3%, the -1 for the students, so now you're at plus 4%. And the thing we didn't think about, or that I never thought about, is that as the incentive goes away, it's actually an increase in tax, right? It's a year-to-year increase, so it goes above 5% just because of that. It goes from like 4% to 5.5%. It was capping it at 5%, which the law does not allow for. So, and it's just like I said, it's kind of this black complicated black box model. It's not something Brad could just, fix.
Yeah, I think Brad's one sentence was, there's a deficiency in the model and the data that you have from it, given what you asked, is not accurate.
So,
That's helpful.
given that, how do we ensure confidence in the model?
So we don't. We can't use the model, but we do have Bob, who's better than the model.
Wow.
So what Bob did, because he had nothing better to do on Easter Sunday, I think, he did some lengthy calculations, which took me a while to figure out, but I'm better than the model. And it basically adds the, well, if you remember this, what you're looking at here, we've seen this a couple times. The first column is the without the consolidation version. So what we did was we went back to the model that we believe is correct, 2% minus 1% model. And then Bob calculated what the tax increase would be in Shelburne for their bond, in Williston for their bond, and we added that incremental tax to those two towns.
To the do-nothing column in those two communities.
And then he calculated what adding those two bonds to the overall SD tax rate would do, and we added that to the consolidated column. So those are the changes we made to the base model that we believe is correct. And this is the answer you get. It, as you would anticipate, makes the differential for Shelburne and Williston much bigger, much more favorable, because they're now sharing their bonds with the rest. It makes the Charlotte, Heinsberg, and St. George differential smaller. I don't think it significantly changes the storyline for Charlotte and St. George, but Heinsberg is in the situation Williston was, which is kind of, at the end of 5 years, it's going to be an increase to its tax rate instead of a decrease. So that's the one town that this model makes the story that tough. But this is
Say that again.
so you see the 4 columns.
Yep.
So there's the standalone or do nothing, the consolidated one. The next one's just the difference, and you can see the 5th year in Heinsberg, their tax rate is actually 2 cents higher than it would have been if we don't consolidate. Same situation that Williston was in with the original model, right? So so that's the numbers you're looking at. I let Bob speak for it. It's mostly his work, but it certainly makes sense.
Does Heinsberg have deferred maintenance too, though, that within a few years, we're gonna have to?
Heinsberg had the very smallest amount of deferred
Yeah.
maintenance, because we thought, well, we could go in and we could do, but
Yeah,
it's only, it wouldn't
wouldn't tell a different story.
wouldn't tell a different story. We'd probably end up adding a few $1 million to everybody else, and, that's not gonna, so.
Heinsberg has had a very aggressive, attentive capital improvement program for 15 years at least.
And Heinsberg has done a lot of work in the last 4 years at bringing down their cost per pupil. Had they not done that work and stayed where other people were, they'd be getting kind of the Charlotte kind of difference, but they're getting closer over time to the Shelburne Williston zone. Yeah, Shelburne Williston, and further away from Charlotte. So they end up in the middle. And to Jean's point, they cross over with this analysis in that 5th year.
Which is why we have the cum column, because you don't cross over, and when you cum up, I mean, at the end of 5 years, you're still better off, but in the standalone, you're.
So this might be a little late to ask this question, but the minus 1% EP, that's in the statewide model or in our application of the model to what we think is going to happen here in our district?
That is the 3 parameters. That's one of the 3 parameters that we can put into the system for our setting, but we have one number to put in for the combined district.
So the minus 1 was our number.
Yes.
That's what we think all of our schools
Yeah.
are going to
Yep.
So this is the numbers that we have. I think, Colin, you may want to go into this conversation of whether or not it's too late to get this into a report, which it very well could be. It doesn't mean they're not valid, but it could be something we use, not in the report, but for communication with the community. That's, I think, what you were asking me about earlier.
Yeah, and, you know, I'm gonna be looking to Mike knows how much time we've invested with having our report, you know, every little detail of the report looked at. This is a mid-range.
It is, Brad James is certainly fully aware of the deficiency in the model, and he's held a communication with you about that, been very able. My sense is that it is certainly fair play, I think, to provide this revised document to Brad this week in advance of a formal submission next week. So I think this is okay, if he gets this week and understands it'll be a new entry.
And I was, you know, I was wondering, do we have, because it affects the narrative as well, do we have both, or is that just too confusing? Or do we say a model developed by our SU that has, you know,
Genius.
these are the
comma,
goals?
Genius.
If I can make a recommendation, I think I think all you need to do is make sure the narrative matches up with whatever you choose to do here.
Yeah.
You don't want a conflict between the language and what's presented at the back end, and there was that conflict until we had this available, because I think the narrative indicated that we were going to do something to take into account the significant debt decisions that Shelburne had made and Charlotte or Wilson was going to make in our table. If you leave that in, you really do need to have this there.
It supports the assets and liabilities table, is what you're saying.
It connects.
Yeah, that.
It connects the language to the document, but I almost think you can choose either one. I don't think, this is the point the three of us were discussing earlier. I just think you need to make sure the written doesn't conflict with the exhibits you've got, and then whatever you do, take advantage of the additional information you've got in your communication plan going forward.
You know, I would actually almost agree, Colleen, about having them perhaps both in there, because the other one is the output of the model we were given, without any creativity. You know, and so in a way, it could be like, okay, this is the report, this is what the state model says, this is everything. We did want to take another look at it, and so with some, you know,
And we did want to add
thoughtful
in
adjustments.
capital improvements.
So I can't, I'm not sure I looked at the most recent draft to know what the verbiage is.
Can you just put a new appendix in the back and footnote it somehow on the page, like, because you're doing it later? I don't know.
I think, I mean, if everyone agrees that we want a second page, I think it does make sense to, let me back up. So the benefit of using the DMC model, it's not a state developed model, it's came to us through the Vermont School Board Association. The benefit of using that is because that's a model that everybody else is using, and the three other SUs going before the State Board of Education are going to be using that model, I'm assuming. So there's the benefit of having that model. I could see having, okay, this is the model that we use, everybody else is using it, and this is how we stack up. And then we wanted to take it a step further. We do have an appendix that has our capital investments, our assets and liabilities. And so we can say that, you know, we wanted to account for that, and this is what we came up with to account for that, so.
And if we intend to use these numbers in our communication going forward, I think they should be in there. As an appendix.
Yeah.
Or something, right?
Yeah, literally, this takes into account the debt service plan for the two schools that either have or will be considering a major decision in that area.
And we could present it like that. It could be, you know, I think appendix H or whatever it is assets, liabilities, and appendix I. And I don't remember if those are the
You don't?
E, F, G, I don't know. Appendix F being the assets, liabilities, and appendix G being, you know, right next to it, assets. Tax rate, and then the tax rate with debt. What do you think? How are people feeling about this? strong opinions one way or the other.
I think the only the point that was made, if we're gonna use this in our communications going forward, having it in the reports.
It's important to note that we did think about it. It's big numbers, sure. And
I'll send a note to Brad so that he's got the information and isn't.
And if
Seeing
you
it
could give
for
us
the
the
first time.
methodology, give
Yeah, just
us.
attach this.
Yeah, got it. Brad will actually understand.
Wait, don't give it back, it's one copy.
But whoever has this,
It's my
if you
pen
could give us I know you lock your documents, if you could give me a little narrative underneath that explains this in relation to the first one.
Okay.
And I can do the appendix at the top, don't worry about that, I can have it stamped, but it would be helpful. Because whoever, the state board, they're reading so many documents, if we can explain what our tables are in 1 or 2 sentences and how it relates to the other one, and we'll do this second.
And I'm not quite sure how to handle this, but it just strikes me as, I mean, one is the model, the second one, which is looked at, is truly hypothetical because we're making an assumption that, Williston specifically is going to ask for a certain amount and get it passed before this comes into play. I don't know. I mean, that's hypothetical. So
Yeah,
we
and
just have to communicate that, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a valid assumption. It's gonna happen at some level
That's the advantage of
sometime
putting both of
in the
them
near future.
Yeah.
I think it's more than a hypothetical, it's a likelihood.
That's a good way to put it.
That even if it's not 13.5, maybe
Yeah.
it's 12.
Right.
If, if you put it
Maybe
out
it's
there
not November,
35.
maybe it's March,
It's so that it's not just what if.
I like that.
maybe you would
So
be
it's
adding a
just-
big bond payment on top of a 2% increase in spending with
Yeah.
a 1% decrease. I mean, that's where it kind of gets into, we all know when you pass a big bond, you find a way to take some of your other spending out so that you can get it through, and that's not in here. So it's, there's a lot of hypotheticals.
Okay.
Gene, one question I had on the numbers, if you look at the second column, the without consolidation, obviously, if you did a straight average, it comes out a lot more than $1.82. Is Williston picking up a penny and Heinsberg picking up 2 pennies enough to pay for Charlotte's dropping down 8 cents and St. George's dropping down, 21 cents?
I can tell you that those numbers came from the model, but then we added numbers back, right?
You could just say yes.
I know, I'm stumbling, because this is, so like the Williston numbers here are 6, in that column are 6 cents higher than they would be in the model. Because we added.
All I'm
bond.
saying is, if you present this to somebody
Mhm.
like me, I'm quickly doing the math and saying, okay, how is it that you've got a couple, everybody is basically right on, or I'm sorry, Heinsberg, Shelburne, and Williston are all basically right on the $1.82. Heinsberg and Williston slightly under. Charlotte and St. George are significantly above the consolidated tax rate, yet, everything comes out of the $1.82. So, what's absorbing, is that penny for Williston and 2 pennies for Heinsberg on the tax rate enough to absorb what those other school districts are gaining?
Well, think about how it is, I'm sure it is, but.
Well, the oversimplification is you're assuming an equalized population.
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right, if you just did a straight average on it, and obviously Williston is the largest town within this whole thing, and there's no offense to St. George, but it's, this big compared to.
Right. So, I mean, that's your.
So I just want to make sure that
I'd
you're
say the answer is
comfortable.
yes to your question, because St. George is the best example of that. St. George ends up with a significant tax advantage to a particular homeowner, but the cost to deliver that is spread across large schools elsewhere. So that's kind of where it gets lost for both St. George and Charlotte. Do what you did in those 2 communities. It's spread across a lot more homes than the others.
And just, sort of along the same point, I was playing around with our historical spending per pupil, and for some reason we don't have that in our report. And, you know, Heinsberg and Charlotte, as you can imagine, smaller districts, larger cost for, you know, spending per pupil, and Shelburne and Williston significantly lower. So, I mean, there's so many ways to slice and dice these numbers. I don't know. I'll talk to you about whether or not we need another table in there too. So, the direction that I think I'm hearing from people is add this table to the report as a second appendix and explain it.
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. Anything else on the financials updates?
And Bob, you said you'll directly communicate with Brad.
Yeah, I'll send Brad all the background information, so he's as conversant in all this as Gene and I are.
Super.
Which brings us to the, you know, the next discussion item, the Agency of Education review of the report. And this is also, on this discussion item, it's an opportunity for you to give feedback now if you can, or the next day after you leave this meeting and you go, oh, I should have said something. If you could get that feedback ASAP. You know, we're gonna vote on the report tonight as amended. So the status of the report, it's gone back and forth a few times. I think our third edit is going to them or our third version of it is going to them at the end of this week. My goal is to have it in their hands Thursday or Friday. And it's been analyzed very carefully. You know, very fine detail. So after the agency gets it one more time, they're gonna give it another look through. And, you know, I imagine the financials, you might get some questions about that. And then they forward it to the State Board of Ed in time for their meeting. So where we are right now, if you've had a chance to run through it, does anyone have any questions, comments on it? And I don't know if you want to say, oh.
The agency's been great. They've been pure to their own timeline. As Colin said, very attentive to detail. And very complimentary of the work as well. They've been very pleased with the clarity and comprehensiveness of the report, so kudos to all. That's a credit. Good time to speak about the St. George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll start and then you take it on.
Please, yeah.
So one of the pieces that we spent the most time on was what if St. George says no? And we know from our financial models that for St. George, there's a lot of reason for voters in St. George to join a consolidated governance structure, and also just, you know, so that they're part of a school, and as Kelly has said a number of times, so that when they're on the board, they can vote. But the agency was very concerned about, well, what if St. George says no, the four others, the necessary districts say,
Why would they?
Is it our numbers?
You see the
That's what I
numbers?
said.
Yeah. It's a hypothetical. It's a hypothetical, and, you know, making sure we've got our ducks in a row. It's unlikely. And there's been a tremendous amount of energy put into the what if St. George says no. So part of what, I'm gonna ask Mike to take this on, because he's dealing with this throughout the state, but one of the pieces, and I want you all to imprint this in your head, we are seeking designation as a supervisory district. Supervisory district, that's what we want, our designation from the State Board of Ed. So if anybody that you talk with says, what are you seeking? It's more than a unified district. We want that designation for administrative functions to be a supervisory district. We don't want to be designated as a supervisory union or a unified district and then have an overriding supervisory union and then have a St. Board in a St. George school district. So we are going to strongly advocate with the Agency of Ed. We have been doing that. Chris has been incredibly helpful. Mike's been very helpful with us. And it's the agency's recommendation that's important to the State Board of Ed. So when we also go to the State Board of Ed and we'll do some preliminary work prior to our meeting, we want that designation as a supervisory district. But why don't you talk about St. George?
Sure, it's a lovely town. It's nearby. Just walking back into the committee's work in the late fall, it's certainly a conversation point that's, I'm sure, very familiar to you, and that is how you want to structure the nature of the forming districts. You were clear that the 4 operating towns would be necessary and St. George would be advisable. You didn't want the prospect of St. George, despite the fact that it looks very favorable in terms of how that vote may go, to have a negative effect on the other 4. So that was the prospect of how you came to terms with that. You're well in the timeline right now to stay on the accelerated pathway. And the accelerated pathway we know means successful votes by this June and operational by a year out, July of 2017. And with that comes the transition facilitation grant. With that comes the 5 years, 30 cents of homestead tax incentives, as you've just been looking at. And that's all neat and clean. But again, the agency staff has to really work into the what ifs. And the dynamic of St. George being a non-operating district in a region where it's unusual to have non-operating districts, conversation point became, well, what are you going to do with St. George if they vote no? And the response was, what are you, the state, going to do if St. George says no? And that became the conversation point about the what if around St. George. The governance team within the agency, I think, has been very fair in its review of this and has said, well, we're prepared to recommend to the Secretary Holcomb, that in the event St. George votes no, but you still form a union district with the other 4, that we appreciate and understand your insistence on being an SD, and that an arrangement could be made by St. George then contracting with the SU for its administrative services. I'm sorry, from the SD, thank you, for its administrative services. And the Secretary is due to come to that conclusion, her conclusion around that later this week or early next week, certainly before the deadline for your submission of materials. Along the same lines, the staff wanted us just to be aware of their perspective as they read the law, that in the event you've got the 4 necessary towns voting yes, and at least initially St. George voting no, and it throws the project out of the accelerated phase 1 structure. It throws you into the red structure, in which you've got the minimum of 4 communities or 1,250 students forming a new regional education district through this unified merger. And as such, the project would not be eligible for the 5 years of incentive, but be eligible for 4 years of incentive, 20 cents and still $150,000 less current expenses in the competition grant. Chris, go ahead. Yeah.
Wait, so just want to clarify,
Please.
I mean, that's an important point, that with no St. George, it's a 4-year and we don't get the 150K transition. So we'll be lobbying in St.
We'll
George.
be billing St. George.
So the reason for this, and maybe this is a question.
Yeah.
The reason is that the law says for accelerated incentives and benefits, all members of the SU have to form a union district.
Interesting. So, but when we were speaking about it with this committee, and certainly myself, we're thinking that St. George as a non-advisory, or we are an advisory, as an advisory, we didn't have that kind of clout, so to speak, right? I mean, is that surprising?
Understand it going.
Yeah, that's surprising to me.
Because they're not technically part of the SU, are they? They're
Yeah,
contractual.
well, they're a member of the SU.
They
They're
are
a member of
the
the
SU.
SU and they're not a member of CDU.
They have a seat on the SU board, is that right?
Yes.
So, yeah, they're a member of the SU. So Chris's take is, well, we appreciate that is a worldview.
It's spoken very
Okay.
clearly.
Sorry, so maybe this is a premature question, but all right, let's say if St. George votes no, and then we're under contract with the new supervisory district, so the St. George School Board District still exists. The new Champlain Valley School District exists, but now we are under contract K-12 with someone, so we're a school district without a vote anywhere, we're not in part of a unified district. Is that,
So,
so yeah,
you have 2 questions in there. One is what's the relationship of St. George with the forming district, whatever that is.
Right.
That's why we want the forming district to be designated a supervisory district so that we could do a fee for services with St. George.
Right.
And essentially your contract with Williston, your elementary, middle school students would continue, it's just with a new entity. Your high school students, that's still St. George's issue, whatever you do.
But the
So that's-
supervisory union is dissolved.
Well, that's what we're seeking.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get that too, okay.
So Chris's worldview is if St. George doesn't see the light and vote yes on the first round, we know St. George has a potential second bite at the apple. And although that potential yes vote on the second vote may occur after June 30th, that in Chris's mind, there's a case to be made that the accelerated conditions still exist with the operation of this new SD coming alive on July 1st, 2017. And therefore, he thinks there could be a case made there. Secondly, he believes that if that is not a satisfactory way of the agency and state board seeing the world, that you've got the first half of the biennium coming up with the next legislative session. And this is such an unusual situation, he thinks there certainly could be specialized legislation inserted to protect for your accelerated future around the 5-year piece.
So, in addition to the report that you didn't see, last time, was giving St. George a second chance to vote by November 30th. Copy that you have since November 31st. It's kind of a leap year that I have it in there. It's actually November 30th. So you have a second chance. And what Mike is talking about now is, if St. George were to join and we're fully operational by July 1st, 2017, aren't we still meeting the goal of a fully operational 5 forming districts?
So Chris's suggestion to the committee is not to get up in arms now about that. It's an unlikely scenario. So that's reason enough not to spend extra energy on this. But also not to unnecessarily show your hand now in terms of what your attention to this would be after, if need be. Sort of keep your powder dry was the mentality now, and certainly bring up those points thereafter. He appreciates and respects the agency's interpretation of the law. He's not convinced it's the only interpretation of the law. So he's in this for a penny on the pound, I guess, to put it that way.
Because the way I hear this, I feel like this is a way for a district not to offload a district to Helm law. Because we get, you're advisory, and if you're not in, you're not in. See you later.
That's a good
So
point.
that's kind of protecting
Yeah.
a district like St. George in the long run. So yeah, that totally makes sense. And like Russ says, there's a reason why you guys should vote yes anyway.
Yeah, we want the
Yes,
100
yes.
students from St. George.
Oh, no, I was saying one, but you're right, we want the 100 students.
In most of their,
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
We get the 100 students, we get the tax break.
But you're right, but that, we've come a long way in the supervisory union, but that's not the spirit of what's happening in the state with these little sending towns.
right.
And it's interesting because I answered a question this week from someone who wanted to know, is St. George still choice because she's gonna buy a house here? And I said, St. George hasn't been school choice for over a decade, K-8, we've been in this contract. Oh, was that cost savings or just administrative simplicity? And I wrote back and I'm like, no, actually it was to guarantee continuity of educational services for our kids, because there was a time prior to us that the first contract really came with Williston because no one did want St. George's kids. So
They
we
were
have
used to be in
come,
Heinsberg.
yeah. Or was it right?
I'm not advocating for this yet.
Yeah.
I'm just asking questions. Is it too late to make St. George necessary?
Yeah.
Because I advocated for it being advisory because I felt we were gonna get full incentives if they said no. And I think there are a lot of people in my community that if we don't get the full incentives, they're gonna say, I don't wanna vote for this. So, that brings St. George back into the all or nothing conversation that we had about everybody else.
I think we talked through that in one of our conversations with Chris, and I'm trying to remember where it landed. That was like a while ago, but
Chris Leopold.
Chris Leopold, our legal counsel,
Got
and he's dealing with a number of these, sorts of articles and.
And my belief too was that we were not
Operational.
originally labeled necessary because we didn't actually have
An
buildings.
operational.
Right, not because we were not.
When it comes time to vote, and the citizens of Winesburg are trying to decide which way to vote, they're no more guaranteed that St. George is gonna vote for it than Williston, Charlotte, or Sheldon. So, you know, I'm not sure that you can go into the vote and say, well, St. George could muck this up for me, and it would be the difference between 4 years and 5 years of tax incentive. So how's that gonna affect the vote? It could just as easily be one of the other towns that shoots it down and bumps it all up.
Well,
Makes sense.
because if
One or the other.
Williston says no, then it's off the
There
table.
it is off.
Right.
Well, so
Then
we
you're
come
not
back and try again.
Right, but you're not in, you get.
But you could have a very small population derailing the whole thing.
If St. George was necessary.
Right. You could, 40 people show up to vote.
Well, my point, especially in light of the numbers that we just looked at, is there could be some people in Heinsberg that are voting because they think they're getting the 30 cents a cent. And if they're not getting that first 10 cents, that could be a dispositive reason they would change their vote.
Then we would change those numbers.
But they wouldn't get the 20, they wouldn't get those 10 cents. And they wouldn't know they weren't gonna get those 10 cents until after the vote though.
But
I'm just confused with,
that's correct.
okay.
But they're gonna take the view, I'm getting the 30 cents or I'm happy being on my own. Because we've done a pretty good job for the last few years, being on our own.
A logical argument would be, if you vote no, you got no chance to get it. If you vote yes, you got a chance to get it. We usually think that. I know, it does, kind of goes against the other argument. That's how I explain it when people ask.
Well, we could all camp out in the town hall April 1st when we come to pay our taxes. Start harassing.
So,
I think we, as Michael's counsel, just leave it as is.
so you'll see the changes in the article. I don't know if you want to flip through, it's bolded. Most of the changes, if you move to page 16.
All the changes to the article have to do with St. George, right?
Pardon me?
All the changes to the articles have to do with St. George.
All the changes have to do with St. George. So in Article 2, it's just adding, St. George votes upon and approves, blah, blah, blah. They become part of the 20 districts, that's just lexicon. Then, really, probably Article 15, just ensuring, making more clear, it's not necessary to have it in here, but making more clear in Article 15, that St. George Elementary Middle School would still be going to Williston the first year. Article 17 is the subsequent admission, the opportunity for a second vote for St. George. So are there other questions related to the if St. George folks know that question? Anyone have anything else? Keith, you're good with us?
I'm not good, but I have accepted the committee.
It's a good puzzle, isn't it?
It's a puzzle.
I think we have to be clear in our FAQs about that. It feels like we've always said that if one of the four says no, we don't do it, but we've never really talked about if St. George says no. what the consequences.
Because until now, there wasn't any.
Right.
Yeah, I think we all had and I was thinking that if all four said yes, then we would still get that 10-8 to 150K. And when you read the legislation, you can probably interpret it in two different ways, but the way the agency is interpreting it is, no.
It would seem like with the limited number of voters in St. George, that with a good outreach program, you could really make sure that it goes the right way. I mean, you don't have to get to that many people.
house. So funny, because really for the past week, I've just been standing in Allenburg handing out those yellow flyers, so maybe I should just go back to St. George. I'm more concerned about Williston than I'm concerned about St. George, but I hear ya.
Maybe you could buy everybody in St. George a red t-shirt that says we were a red.
This committee can go door to door and get the whole town.
Right.
So Russ, can we get more of your copies of your shirt, your red shirt?
I'm the one who made it. I got the template.
Anything else on the report, Mike?
No.
So we'll be looking for action on the report tonight.
Actually, one other St. George detail, I guess, and that is that the agency's thinking is that St. George is outside of this new union district, that it will need to, within a few years, figure out what that means. For the continued ability for St. George to purchase administrative services from Champlain Valley Union District, or whether it needs to get annexed with some other district.
Oh, should we vote no?
Yes.
Okay.
And if there's no easy solution in the immediate region, and if the immediate region is not any sort of, it's a practical concern, but it's not a technical concern to the agency.
Right.
So, worst case scenario, St. George could end up being annexed with some Northeast Kingdom non-operating districts.
Right, well, that was my understanding in the beginning of this. If St. George or any of these non-operating towns decided to cling to their choice, right? That the state would eventually come in and consolidate the pieces as they saw fit.
They have the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Did we talk about what's the belabor this, but the relationship to St. George to the district supervisory district? If they vote no, they would have no one on the supervisory district board.
So this is a good question, and we're going to be be asking for a motion on this later. So one of the things that we want to do is have this committee agree to, that the study committee agrees to provide administrative services to the St. George School District on a fee-for-service basis. So one of the motions will be asking this committee, do you agree that if St. George votes no, that we want to provide administrative services to the St. George School District?
You don't have to do that then.
We don't have to, we're asking, but I'm proposing that that's one of the
St.
things
George
that we
doesn't
make
necessarily
clear.
accept it either.
No, I know, but
We're just-
I mean, as this new district, you don't necessarily have to.
The supervisory district?
Yeah, right? I mean, you're under no obligation to offer educational services to St. George.
Right, so we want to go to the State Board of Ed and say,
Hold on though, because how long does the contract with Williston go? Because if the new district is taking over all liabilities, that contract,
for that tuition for their elementary and middle
that would be
school.
for the,
Yeah.
right?
Mr. Bob?
What would happen is, what you need to recognize is the Williston School District, that's the signer to the current agreement, disappears
Yeah.
as of July 1st. What has to happen if St. George votes no is they need to enter into a successor contract with the new district to provide education at Williston, if that's their desire. They need to spend time to negotiate an agreement with the successor district for high school education if they want to do something novel with CDU. And then they need to enter into an agreement with the successor district for administrative services. Of the three, the easiest to orchestrate is the third one, the administrative services. We know exactly what that consists of. We know how to appropriately cost it and charge for it. It's in essence the effort that Elaine and I and probably two others within the supervisory union provided support to them. So
With the healthy market for the fact that it cost everybody else in the district 10 cents
Yeah.
in tax rate.
yeah, we'll lean on this corner to help with the pricing of the situation.
I will be doing
Yeah, we see our way to it, I just want everybody to understand that. That's true.
Gene, you had a question a second ago about the
Yeah.
relationship between St. George in that context and the supervisory district board. There really is no supervisory district board for the Champlain Valley Union District. It becomes a supervisory district, and that's important for a lot of administrative reasons. But unlike the SU board, there's no sitting SD board. The
Whatever the
governing,
board is, that's.
well, it's the governing board of that district serves all those needs.
But the point is that St. George would have no vote on the governing board of the district.
That's
They would
correct.
just be tuitioning and they would,
That's true, yes.
But
that's what
isn't that only if the AOE or the BOE says we can do that?
The State Board of Ed, if they agree that we're designated.
If they don't agree, then we've got a SU board, a St. George board, and a SD or
Right.
whatever board, right?
Yeah. Unified.
Looks like.
look like Chittenden and East.
And the likelihood of them agreeing to not have that structure is increased if we agree to provide them those three services.
Wait, I'm mixed up on your negatives. Go
The
ahead.
the likelihood of the powers that be saying we can have one board.
Yeah.
With
Increase.
service arrangements with St. George increases if we say, yeah, we'll do that
Right.
service arrangement.
Exactly.
Yes.
Which is why we're gonna have a motion on the table tonight to be proactive, to be very clear that
Now,
all
this,
for one and one for all.
this committee can't obligate the district to that agreement. It would just-
We're asking.
Right, that's fair, but it's, we can't,
Even if it's an article.
it's not an article.
The State Board would designate.
That we have to provide them services? That the new board
That
has
they
to
would be
provide-
assigned to, oh, I see what you're saying. Does St. George have a voice in whether or not they want to?
It's both sides.
No, I-
No,
yeah.
Gene's saying we can take a vote here, but it doesn't bind the board.
Doesn't bind the new board.
The new board can take it under advisement. Thanks for the great
Unless
idea.
they're buying up.
My understanding is that it would be bound by the agency accepting their report.
That's my understanding also. I agree with you.
Is that gonna be, that's gonna be in the report that we agree to do that?
That's why we're having a motion, we're gonna have a letter that goes to, State Board of
Yeah,
Ed.
we can bootstrap that, sure. If they approve our report in part on the basis that we say we're gonna do that, and then if we don't,
In one of the things
it'll
that
be
we,
problematic.
one of the things that we did do is add language, it's not highlighted because it's an earlier version, but if you do a run through the report, we added, statements related to designation as a supervisory district in a few places. It's in the executive session, it's in the findings during the transition, and then, Chris's interpretation is that the state board accepts the report, they're accepting that understanding that this would become a supervisory district.
And that gets translated to the secretary's formal recommendation to the state board. So that's where, that's, at that level, it becomes binding on her. For caveats around that. So it's important for us to know where she stands on it in the next.
It's just kind of interesting to me that there's something outside of the articles that's gonna bind the
That's
citizens of the
where I was.
4 towns to something they did not vote on.
Well, the state board retains that authority to alter anything in your articles or anything in your report. I mean, that's the roll of the dice.
I'd soften
Regulatory state.
the language, I'd soften the language of bound, though. I think what they're gonna bind you to is that you're obligated to strike an agreement for administrative services amongst the two parties. They can't stipulate the nature of that agreement, nor can they demand that you play nice. So it might very well be that you do understand, we're down a series of things that aren't gonna happen. We've started with St. George isn't gonna approve.
Yeah.
Right.
And now we're with that we can't
we
reach
spiral.
agreement. For, I think it ends up back in the lap of the State Board of Education and you all can't agree to play. Does that legally sound plausible?
Yeah, there'll be some coercion.
I mean, the fact is that the state board has a lot of authority and latitude already in lots of things. Like every time you hire a new superintendent, they have the right to say, no, you don't need a superintendent. We're gonna put you with somebody else. You are not large enough, we're gonna combine you. They could do that now and they don't. So,
Well, they could say, okay, we like your report, but you're also taking Huntington. I mean.
so that would happen not now, but in 2019.
I mean, if they could tell us we have to take St. George, they could tell us like.
In 2019, I am led to believe that all of these little orphans
Yeah.
will be assigned. And, you know, that's one of the things. I know we don't want to lead with this,
You just did.
but 2019, there are gonna be a lot of mergers that are gonna happen because the Secretary of Education says, here's what makes sense.
Huntington's not a good parallel, only because that's a different process. It's called supervisory and boundary adjustment. There's a full-blown process for that.
Any more questions or comments on this interesting conversation?
So the engineer here at the table, listening to the lawyers and the financiers after this, is that I really think it comes back to almost the original argument. Like, there's no real reasons for St. George to not
Right.
vote yes.
They're the most
And
likely.
like, if you look at what's the basic reason for this whole Act 46, it's to lower the education costs. So like, would you much rather pay the average education cost, you know, for the state of Vermont, or would you like to pay the
Oh, I love
cost
paying
of the
the
SD? You know, you just said it, like you go with like 17 down to 15 or 16, so.
Yeah, and part of this exercise is because the state is looking, you know, the agency is looking at the big picture of what's happening in the state, and our model can probably serve as a model for other SUs that might be in a similar situation. So if we just have all of our ducks in a row, we have a good understanding of what we're doing going forward.
There's not a big enough population of high school students accessing school choice to be a population that would change the conversation.
Right, right. Okay?
Okay.
Good on that one. Communications and public engagement. Who wants to take that one?
Those things need to happen.
Yeah.
There's a meeting tomorrow morning, St. George. Start, assuming all approvals go as we're expecting to this evening. Start putting together packages of FAQs that can go in front porch forums. The April 12th meeting is coming up. It needs to get publicized out in school papers and wherever we can do. I don't know if anybody's been to a select board meeting, but some of that stuff is
Elaine, do you want to pass? They're going to take like 10 or 20 of these and keep them on you at all times.
Has anybody done a presentation of the select board in their town?
No, but I will.
Did you?
Not, mostly just at the town meeting.
Yeah.
But I am gonna get on their agenda again, to discuss this.
There is a family dance at HCS on Friday night, and the parent group suggested to me yesterday that they will set up a table to talk about Act 46 that I will be standing next to. If anybody else wants to come, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the dance
It's
ends
on
at
before.
8:30. This time.
Maybe during.
So I'm picking up a bunch of these. If you have any other materials, you can send me. I'll put them on the table too. I know, do we have more of these things? Green things?
I have some in my car, so if we walk out together, I'll give you a whole bunch
Okay.
to get into Friday.
And just to let you know, so we had Marco the Magician in Williston last week, the week before, and I literally stood at the front door and just handed them to people as they walked in. A little more pushy than just having them on the table, but I noticed our green piles of those other pages were on the table and nobody really saw it. And at pickup time, especially because I think in K2, more parents come to pick up their kids. So I've been going early and just handing them out. And there's not as much as we think we're getting the message out. The information is, oh, well, this is just about the budget, right? And this is all square. There's very few, this is, you really need to read this. So It's just been kind of a grassroots.
Yeah, I think that as much as we think, as much as we put an article in the paper and all that stuff. We all know, right? We've had this conversation a number of times. We're inside bubble.
Right.
Outside bubble. So this is great. April and May are great times for school events. We have a school play coming up next week that I was going to do the same sort of thing, and we have a variety show later in April. So
I think the front porch forum things will start the conversation. That's when people start paying attention.
So will the communications subcommittee is gonna like start developing short little blurbs for FPF?
and I don't, I assume maybe each board has somebody who does their front porch forum sort of able to get out there.
I think, you know, one of the pieces that we can't forget are the people in the community that don't have kids. You know, I think it's like 75% of households do not have children in school. So we'll have to do some outreach to them as well, if anyone has connections there. And if we just make our names available and just say, hey, we're willing to come and talk with your group. You know, Heinsberg has a senior lunch. People they want to know what's going on in the schools. So tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock?
8 o'clock, St. George Town Hall.
Karen, did you want to say anything about the PowerPoint?
So after the last month, or I guess it was earlier this month, when we had a communications meeting, we just talked about trying to put together a PowerPoint presentation. So I took from a starting point the January presentation to all the boards, because that was more up to date than what we did in November. And then have added some things to it, like this map showing sort of what the state owes. And then I think we have some other things that we want to add to it, just more information, but, and because it's really, it needs to be more factual than what the November presentations were. It needs to be more specific.
The November one was a different purpose. It was,
Right,
we
exactly.
need your input. Now it's like, this is what we're doing,
you know, so,
And it
so
looks
that's
great.
what we're
So,
considering.
sort of the idea around it is something we can have out there that we can use at the April 12th up at CDU, but also select board meetings, or go to the senior centers, or anything else, PTO, something.
Right, so the title was just gonna be general, just to say community presentation to residents of the 5 towns, so that it doesn't say for Act 46 night, you know, at CDU or something, so we can use it for any type of meeting with community members.
Are you gonna circulate that in the next couple of days?
Yeah. We're gonna take a look at it
Yeah,
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
I would love to have it by Friday.
Karen, that map got updated about 2 weeks ago. And
Okay.
And to that end, Mike, can you
We'll get it next week.
refresh our memory on how many of these have been approved?
I believe the number, well, it depends which map that is.
This is the one from March 9th.
5 approved at town meeting.
Town meeting,
And 3 before then?
3 or 4 then, I think we're 8. There are
This said 9.
9, is it 9? 4 more scheduled in June. I think the state's talking about a target possibility of 14 by July 1st.
Which is way over what they thought, right?
They
Yeah,
thought,
they thought
3.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
One of my arguments on the financial part is, okay, well, you know, you're gonna be paying for everybody else to do this.
Right.
How many are there? And I'll say 10, maybe 15.
Well, we have 5, 9, could be 12 or more.
Those 9 were 41 districts, is that what I remember, like around 40?
40, I think
The
it's.
town meeting was, the 5 you're talking about, the town meeting day?
I think the 9
The
total
9
Oh, 9
altogether, I think
is up to like around the 40s.
40, yeah,
The 40.
approximately 40 is what I have on this.
That was
That came
41.
from when we talked about this last time.
But that's the other one, 40 of
Yeah.
266.
Yeah.
Out of, you know, so many, just, it only, so put it in context of the total number that might be doing it, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can be fine. And I know Jean, you said you were willing to help out with that April 12th.
You're gonna wear the costume or?
So-
Red hot costume?
So the April 12th meeting,
Trying to come up with the unification costume.
CDU, Heinsberg, our teacher, or the PI group.
So I suggested, I talked to the Heinsberg parent group about doing some sort of hosting thing at that night with food or something. And I had since seen an email from the parent chair in Heinsberg to the parent chairs of everyone else's school. So I think there's some coordination going on.
Yeah.
Very nice.
That's what she emailed us.
That's great.
That's kind of nice when that just happens,
Yeah,
right?
that's great.
Organically without pushing it.
First of all.
So,
It's like they want to be one district.
Weird.
Weird.
so this might be an okay time to talk about the town clerks. Coordinating with the town clerks, just so that they're up to speed. So who wants to?
Bob, you want to speak to that?
I can, we're trying to get them together in the same room to outline what's gonna happen from their view. And, so we'll walk through the articles they're gonna see. They're gonna need to circulate petitions for the open board seats and get somebody in the community to submit petitions with sufficient signatures. And how voting is going to proceed that day. So we're currently working on getting that in the not too distant future. I think, Chris recommended that we wait until the 30-day period has lapsed on votes we took last March so that they don't get confused and wound up and inappropriately distracted by something else. And then get them together very early enough that they can be supportive of what's going to unfold.
So
as we
goal
get
is
to the
to
end of
do
April.
before the state board meeting.
30 days would be
Tomorrow, Friday.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Not that you're counting.
not that we count, but yes.
So sometime in the 2-week period
Next-
before.
Next couple of weeks, we'll get them together and, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. It began with people thinking all the votes had to head to CVU and be thrown on the floor of the library and co-mingled. And, so we kind of clarified that no, this is local school districts, local town school districts voting on initiatives, and the votes will be tallied locally and reported locally. And it doesn't go to CVU for that interesting process. But they approve it, and then the next one does. So, anyway, we're working it.
And I plan to attend just to provide a voice from the committee. Listen.
Just out of curiosity, did the town bill us for this service?
It's interesting you asked that question. It's a regular topic of conversation. If there was some process with which they could bill you, probably 2 communities would lead that charge and 2 communities would probably not. So up until this point, you, as local town districts, are not billed for, that I know of,
How about for the programming of the?
election services, and no district that I know of has figured out a way to bill CDU for its process, but that may come up in the conversation we have mid-month, and we'll wrestle it to the ground.
And is there a provision in state law that either allows it or disallows it, or is it just sort of silent to it?
I know of no language in law that helps them with their costs. I don't think it touches that. It assumes that, as in the old days, that towns would, get together and collaboratively work with their school districts and do things on the up and up without complication.
We actually had this conversation last year, it was around the second vote on budgeting. The number I was given as a cost to throw an election was a few $100, things like that, because we don't have machines or anything, everything's done by hand.
And all volunteers, manning the.
So,
Minimum wage.
it's all,
I totally get it.
the
You can
clerk
check.
and volunteers doing the voting, and then, counting is done, you can get paid to count, but most people just volunteer.
This is gonna sound old fashioned, but does anybody have machines? Because we count, do all the time too.
Oh, the
You
really
know,
fancy
everything's-
ones.
Somebody could buy.
Yeah.
Real time.
If you become a consolidated district, you get machines.
We'll get their old machines is what will happen.
and St. George being right in the center, maybe that's a good spot to be.
Yeah.
They just print their ballots and then we drive them over to Shelburne and we count them in the Shelburne machine.
So anything else on communications tomorrow morning, 8:00? And those who are attending, maybe if we could get minutes back out to the full committee as soon as we can, so that in case anyone wants to jump in and help out with anything. Okay. St. George is fun if you haven't attended one of these meetings in St. George, 8:00 Wednesday morning. State Board of Education presentation, this is brief, there's, it's going to be April 19th, we don't know what time of day, and I should have looked up where they're meeting, I don't remember where they're meeting, what part of the state. Oh, okay, they move around the state. I've asked Kelly if she was available, if she could attend, just to have a St. George voice there, and then I asked Keith and Mark, one of them could attend because of their work for the articles, and Keith, I know you're traveling with your family, and Mark might or might not be, vacation.
I'm hoping to be there.
State Board of Ed, Zion National Park.
Hellboats. Go to some fabulous monument state.
Sorry, I'm on my bike.
Well, the 19th is vacation.
Yeah, it is vacation week. So if there's anyone else who has a strong interest in attending, I'll make sure that you have information. We'll have the,
Schedule anymore.
And your coworkers love.
Oh, well, then Russ is available. Russ might be a good.
We run a finance person too.
I'd be happy to.
I'll let them do that.
We know where it is.
Okay. So we'll get you more information, just so everyone knows what's gonna happen and when it might be and where it's gonna be. So we have a few action items, and I'm gonna distribute proposed motions. We talked about the first one. These all really kind of relate to what needs to happen in the next couple of weeks. You want me to hold it for you?
At that point, it's like the zone, and it's.
Bob, you can borrow your reading glass.
Yeah, they're 2.0 is a little bit dirty, so.
That's
like
exactly how I
150.
use it. 2.0 a little bit dirty.
That's my prescription.
Oh.
So the first motion is, we talked about this already, it's getting our collective support for, if we're to be designated as a supervisory district and St. George does vote no, that we would that we agree to contracting with St. George on a fee-for-service basis. So if someone wants to make the motion and read it aloud, for anyone who might be listening, I don't know if we're online or not.
Should the first thing say supervisory district instead of unified district then, or does that word not matter?
There are ands in that sentence. So the first thing we need to do is.
Oh, I see.
Okay. So I'll just read it aloud. In the event that the necessary districts, and the necessary being Williston, Heinsberg, Charlotte, Shelburne, in the event that the necessary districts agree to form a unified district, that would become a forming district, in St. George, which is advisory, votes to remain independent, and the State Board of Education designates the forming districts, for the vote yes, a supervisory district, the study committee agrees to provide administrative services to the St. George School District on a contractual fee-for-service basis. Let's discuss. Anyone want clarification on what that
The
says?
study committee isn't gonna be the one providing the administrative services. It
No,
should
but we
say,
agree to it.
we agree that the district
District will.
should provide administrative services.
The language has
The
to
language shouldn't.
This went by Chris.
Yeah, your question, Karen, I'm sorry.
So the last phrase of it says,
Right here.
the study committee agrees to provide administrative services to the St. George School District on a contractual fee-for-service basis, but
We
the
could
study
say
committee isn't
Agree,
providing.
we could say just add, the study committee agrees to the supervisory district providing.
Providing.
Agreed.
Or agrees that the supervisor district will provide.
Yeah.
Or agrees to, agrees to it, yeah.
So will provide or will offer? St. George could go look elsewhere. right?
Yeah, but we're gonna,
You can offer to provide it though. That doesn't change whether or not we take it.
Yes.
You can still provide services, because if not St. George, maybe Huntington. Do you see?
Keith and Mark.
I'm okay with that and that. The study committee agrees that the supervisory district will offer to provide.
Why use three
Certainly
words
wasn't
when
writing,
Kevin's
'cause I
doing it?
No, I think
You
that
still get paid by the
I was
word.
gonna say, this was billable, it'd take an hour to get to that sentence.
thanks for the glasses. It's a good time.
you bet.
So that phrase would be, I'll just read it all from the top. In the event that the necessary districts agree to form a unified district, and St. George votes to remain independent, and the State Board of Education designates the forming districts a supervisory district, the study committee agrees that the supervisory district will offer to provide administrative services to the St. George School District on a contractual fee-for-service basis.
So moved.
Seconded.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? The motion carries.
We don't have to count the fines.
The second motion that we're looking for is a motion to approve and endorse the CSSU Act 46 Study Committee's report to the State Board of Education consistent with provisions identified in 16 VSA Section 706B. Explanation on that is we had discussed about having two separate motions at our last meeting, and Chris advised that it really should be one motion because that's consistent with the way the law is written.
So the approve and endorse those, we talked about having those separately.
Yeah.
We approve the report and we support the conclusion of the report.
So in not so many words, this is the move forward with Act 46.
Exactly.
And that we, as a committee, support.
Right.
the findings.
Would anyone like to make a motion and then we can discuss?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
Speed now.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries, and we have a unified agreement. Okay, very nice. I think that deserves a little. Nice work, team. Okay, the next one is, we'll be looking to authorize the CSSU Act 46 Study Committee Chair to make additional revisions to the report consistent with the work of the study committee and which is non-substantive in nature in response to additional items identified by the Agency of Education during its review of the report. That's, I'll explain, that's just tweaking the final details, and those who have seen the agency's feedback on the report, sometimes it's a very fine detail, and that's why I added non-substantive in nature.
Can
So,
we strike the word additional and replace it with non-material?
in response to non-material items,
No, authorize the CSSU Act 46 Study Committee Chair to make non-material revisions to the report consistent with.
non-material revisions to the report consistent with the work of the study committee, and then what? Strike,
The rest of it, whatever it says.
oh, and non-substantive in nature,
To remove the word additional and replace it with the word non-material.
and you're good with the rest of it?
There's another addition.
It's okay, lawyers like, do we have enough comments in there?
Oh, I assume that was a proper type, proper noun. Title of something that they're
Because it's in caps.
Because it's in caps.
That's what Chris is adding for me.
Are we discussing?
Yes,
Just because we talked at the very beginning of this meeting about adding an appendix, so.
Just adding a phrase saying otherwise approved by the committee during the course of
oh, good,
That's a good idea.
good. And Mark can help us when you're ready.
We'll edit it out.
It's not
It's good to have a couple of lawyers on your team, isn't it?
Definitely is.
Just a couple.
Finance people.
Okay.
So I think it should say, in general, the whole thing should say, authorize the CSSU Act 46 Study Committee Chair to make non-material revisions to the report consistent with the report of the study committee and not substantive in nature in response to additional items identified by the AOE during its review of the report and otherwise approved and other
Amended?
and other materials approved by the committee during the course of discussion at its March 29th meeting.
Can you read that last edition?
Yes. Help me with this. And other materials approved by the committee during the course of discussion at its March 29th meeting.
About other revisions.
Yeah.
As
Other revisions approved by the committee during the course of discussion at its March 29th meeting.
Or approved at the March 29th meeting? Can we just leave it at that?
Yeah.
So, identified by the Agency of Education during its review of the report and other revisions approved at the March 29th meeting? At the study committee's March 29th?
Approved by the committee at the
By
March
the
20th.
committee at its March 29th meeting.
Okay. I'm gonna read it from what I have. Authorize the, motion to authorize the CSSU Act 46 Study Committee Chair to make non-material revisions to the report consistent with the work of the study committee and non-substantive in nature in response to additional items identified by the Agency of Education during its review of the report and other revisions approved by the committee at the March 29th meeting. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you, team.
Did you read my?
I just want to go through the calendar briefly and,
I thought we were gonna do
oh,
this.
I'm sorry.
That's
I
okay.
knew there was something.
But
I was forgetting.
this will only take a minute. So remember at the last meeting, we had quite a long discussion about the last format I had for the opportunities, educational opportunities. And in the end, Eric said, you know, what people really want is to feel safe. And so I said, oh, so what you're really looking for, what are the things that could happen positively instead of the things we're already doing that could scare people, like we're gonna coordinate more, oh my gosh, the SU is gonna coordinate more. So honestly, this is a very, very rough first draft. I did it like at 4:30 this afternoon, with a little help from a friend, right at the end of the table there. So it doesn't necessarily run parallel, but I wanna make sure that this is what you think you were looking for, and then I can work on it some more.
Thank you, Elaine, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I didn't care when I did it. I just want, I do want feedback because I'll work on it some more. Because it's a total, just throw the other one away and start from scratch. Not that care who's there. Gee, you're just in the right seat over there. So I just want to start, the very first line is important and maybe it needs to be underscored more, but these are opportunities that are possible as a result of a CSSU merger, not that would necessarily happen, but they would all be possible if we were merged.
That are not possible now.
Most of these are not possible now, right, exactly.
I appreciate it that you continuously ask us that question, that's important.
Mhm.
Not possible now.
So for instance, school choice, not possible now, period. Staffing, not possible now, period. Sharing resources, limited possibilities now. Creative and innovative staffing, not practical. No one would do it because they have to give up their seniority.
First off, this is exactly what I need.
That's what you need, okay.
To be able to, just because the question that the frequent question, the most frequent question I'm getting is, why will we do this? What advantages does it offer to us? So this is exactly what I need. One thing that I don't see here that I have been telling people is reducing the administrative burden on principals so they can go back in and teach.
Yeah, and that was on that other sheet, and I'll add it, yeah.
You mean be instructional leaders?
Right.
Be instructional leaders, yeah. To be more instructional leaders in teaching rather than budget administrators.
And I might put that under creative and innovative staffing because it sort of elevates that role too from its traditional staff position of
Budget, buses, and buildings. Thank you. Anybody else have something like that they're?
And I can see this on the website.
Yeah.
I want to work on it some more, honestly, really. I did really do this at about 4:30 this afternoon, so it's not polished usually.
Can you explain the individual schools, magnet schools?
Yeah, so you could have, like every school would have to be a comprehensive school, obviously, for the kids that just stay there. But let's say that we had one school that was really jazzed up about getting into makerspace stuff. And maybe we have a school that is, or maybe we have a couple schools that are. Then that could be like, instead of like establishing that same thing in all the schools, you could say, kids can go to that school. Maybe another school really flourishes in the arts, and we say, and every school would have the arts, every school would have music, but if there were a kid that really had a passion about one of these things, and their parents might say, if we could coordinate the busing, which we could, we were all one, then kids could get moved around like that. So that's just, a couple examples, but the examples would spread across anything. You could have a sustainability, think about the magnet schools they have in Burlington. There's no reason why we couldn't do that. Comprehensive schools, but with a real focus on a particular thing.
Well, sports is another one, sports teams. For the K through 8 or middle school where there's I mean, I've heard of this now.
Well,
right?
we've got some combinations now, but they're hit and miss, and then boards have to agree, and then
Right.
we get into some complicated things about one town supporting another town's sports program. In this case, it would be all together, you know.
Elaine, one of the agency's questions was, because we did have just one sentence in our report related to opportunities and perhaps, not currently in the planning part
Yeah.
stages, but related to magnet schools, how do you ensure equity?
So I think for some people that are.
Well, I think that's the piece about fleshing out the comprehensive school piece. So it's not that everybody's going to get, like, the EQS say, here's what a school needs to provide for students, everybody would need to do that. And then it's more about, like, what are you passionate about? So maybe you're learning through that way. And so that provides more opportunities for everything, right? In a way, like the whole personalized learning plan, learning thing is about that. We believe that all kids will learn better if they're engaged and motivated by what it is they're learning. And so if you've got some kids that are really jazzed about drama and music and arts, if more of their learning and meeting the standards can happen through that, they're gonna be more successful. And
So my response to the agency is we hadn't worked on that, so I didn't feel it was appropriate to
I
put
think
it in
that's-
the report.
yeah. I think it does need some more thinking, but I think that that's not a hurdle that we can't cross.
Right, and just a comment, because I read an article somewhere today or yesterday, just about that equity piece and how even with the pre-K programming, right, and some of the other programmings that are happening at the statewide level, that it's still missing a group of kids that they're not getting. So maybe it's not really about the programming itself, like the programming is there, it's open and available, but the communication out, the outreach to this disenfranchised community that might miss it because the parents aren't proactive and they don't go to school. And so that's the real question,
We
about
would-
the equity piece.
But we would definitely need to build this in a way that there was no question that every school is as good as every other school, right?
Yes, but you can have every single school be I mean, those programs can be there, those after-school programs and those, but those kids the same kids are still not gonna go to them.
And that's almost a different problem.
But that's what I'm saying, but so the communication, that piece is, the equity doesn't necessarily come from enhancing the awesome program that's already there, right? The inequity bridge comes from the outreach or doing something different to engage that disenfranchised community, that's all. That's just a.
Yeah, you're both spot on. If you talk to Burlington, the challenge switches when you start to do this diverse offering of learning to both make sure it's equitable in some measure and make sure it's accessible. You can't have, a gifted program in one that only affluent kids can access. You need to make sure that everybody, to your point, there isn't pockets left out that can't access it.
And
So
it'll
it's
be
two
up to
streams.
a new board to come up with a policy for that.
So I also want to share another thing. Yesterday and today, Megan and I were on our round robin tour. So once a month we meet, usually Jeff is with us, so he's at the Agency of Education, CFP training, yearly training, so he doesn't have us much. So we meet with each of the principals, or the group of principals at each school. And one of the key topics this time was Act 46. So they had asked at the last league meeting that we put that on all of our agendas. Remember we had a conversation last month about where the principals were, and I had made a statement just to keep myself so honest that with the possible exception of one person, I believe that they were all in favor. And the fact is that asking them the direct question, they are all in favor. So they all, I think some of them would be more willing to be out there about it and others not. I shared with them that there was no expectation on your part to either put a muzzle on them or to ask them to be the spokesperson, to just be themselves, but they felt comfortable. In fact, a couple of them asked about attending this meeting and I wasn't sure. One of them I thought would come because it seemed like that. But then I ended it with, so are you worried about anything? And I'm just gonna list the things that they said they were worried about and how we responded. So one thing they were worried about was innovation and flexibility. How do you institutionalize that? So I said, we've had a lot of conversations about that. And we at Colt have had a lot of conversations about that. And it strikes me that that's through policy and through budget process. That is how we will need to do that. And I don't know exactly how that's gonna work, but definitely that's how we can make sure that we can institutionalize what everybody in every one of the schools believes that they're doing special things there that are different and unique from what's happening other places. And we value that in this district, and it relates to how we can all learn from each other in that way. Two, what is the continued connection to the public? So I said, well, we've had that conversation too. And so they talked about things like afternoon tea with the principal and advisory council where principals and board reps would meet. Or here's an idea. What about before the new SD meeting each month? Let's say the SD meeting wouldn't start till 6:30. Then maybe at 5:30, the principals and the local reps could meet, just like we already do at CSSU, and we would have a presentation schedule, like we already do. And we would decide that presentation schedule at the retreat, like we already do. So then community members could come to that, hear about it. So that was an idea, and I said, there have been a lot of conversations that the articles speak to the need for that, but don't pigeonhole, what it's gonna be. And lastly, how to budget for equity and innovation. So how do you do that? How do you budget so that it's equitable and yet there is money for innovation? And I said, that's been a conversation too. So there wasn't anything that they're thinking needs to be teased out that hasn't already been a conversation on the table.
That's great.
It's an interesting just thing to put on the to-do list, assuming that this passes in June, is we were going to go visit some successful multi-school districts to figure out how they do budgeting, because we didn't really found, I mean, we never really did that.
The list isn't very long.
Right.
You Go to New York State, figure out how not to do it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other
or
input?
comments?
Good stuff.
Just if you think of something, just send me an email, and let's all work on this again.
This will be nice to get up on the website, so when you're ready.
I'll send you that after. You got anything?
Keith, I do have that number for you. Of the different Baskin Robbins flavors, 153, 156, and Act 46, to date there have been 8 passed, and 6 more pending for June 30th. Your standpoint, one of 10 of the accelerated subsection of it. 8 and 6 are what you want.
Karen, that would be good to get on. Wow. Okay, so just a quick review of the calendar, just, so April 12th, or, we've got the communications subcommittee meeting tomorrow, probably one more meeting at least before the April 12th meeting on that. Then our next meeting is the April 12th meeting. We're gonna be meeting for half an hour, all of us, just something might be coming up, we might need to meet for something. And then 6:30, was it 6 o'clock we have for the presentation? Those of us who are gonna be working on that will flush it out a little bit, distribute that to everybody, but at this point, I'm envisioning something like what we did with our full board meetings where we met individually with our different boards. Maybe we could talk about this tomorrow morning, but maybe there's a way to have conversations within home communities as well, to get at those fears and hopes and wishes and so forth.
And I think it's more productive to have a presentation and a breakout discussion rather than have, maybe, let's say 30 people show up and it get dominated by one voice.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, is opportunity for people to talk. And then we're looking at April 26th is when we have a regular full board, our carousel meetings. That week before, it's a week later than we typically meet because of the April vacation, school vacations. So Tuesday, April 26th, that's when each of the individual boards has to warn the vote, and I'm forgetting if we talked about that here. Did we talk about the individual boards warning?
I was surprised when I saw it, so maybe you can talk to
No, I don't think we have, because I mean,
Do it. The authority is the local.
So this is where you're calling a special school district meeting and you're warning that special meeting for each of your districts, and the boards are responsible for doing that. This is just matching the 30 to 40 day window of getting the warning taken care of, having your clerks post it in that window of time. And it looks like it can be a convenient time to do it all at one setting. So through your carousel structure, each board can take that action independently.
And they can't vote no.
I was gonna say, by that time, the AOE would, it's AOE, right, who would direct us that we don't get a choice, that we are gonna take it to the voters.
The law says that.
Right, right, so that would have already happened, and so,
And so for St. George, I don't need to do that because
Yes, you do need to
You
do
do
that.
need to do that, so Sandy needs to add you back on the carousel loop, the way we do for reorganization. It'll be a short meeting, because you're just gonna approve the warnings.
It
No, but I
allows
thought
us-
originally, as a non-operating town,
No,
St.
you're a
George-
school district, you're part of the SU, and you're voting, your community is going to vote, so you need to warn that special meeting. And the special meeting is the June 7th, voting by Australian ballot.
What your board has the only option to opt out.
I see.
But
What do you
opting
think
in
about
takes an
that?
affirmative action by quorum your board.
If you do decide to do that, you should tell us.
Yes.
like now.
We have some assumptions.
No, Rusty, look, I've been here.
So it's, and just to clarify, it's a, what is this called, ministerial function of the board, is the way Chris Leopold put it. And so your board can't go into deliberation and say, no, we're not going to warn it. It just can't happen.
We need to add that to, that little
Right.
chart that we have that we figured out like a few years ago about like what the board's actions are. We need to add ministerial. You just vote to approve. Right? Because that's what you're saying. This is not a discussion. This is not big debate.
I hope the vote's like
Kind of like approving the regional calendar.
Exactly.
The board's had the chance to inform and advise the committee, so that's, the time's passed.
Okay, so that's gonna happen on the 26th, and just because of the way the calendar was working out, we have a full study committee meeting the night after. It seems like it should be flipped, but it's just we're running out of days. I'm not sure what would be going on there, but my guess is that it's a big conversation about recommendations from the subcommittee related to communications.
That's April 27th.
And then May 10th, we have that, and then still figuring out, I forget where we landed on the 25th and 31st. I think
I don't have anything scheduled.
we haven't committed yet to that.
Right, I believe it works for these three. Either of the dates.
And like,
31st works for me, yeah, to the extent that I needed that night.
so that's, before, so the May 25th, it's either like the day before our full retreat, or we go the day after Memorial Day. Mike can be there with us on the day after Memorial Day. I'm inclined to favor that. Are there other opinions on this?
That's for the 31st.
It's fine.
Okay.
One vote.
Sandy, let's go for the 31st. Okay. That's okay with you?
It is, yeah.
Okay. We just don't know what's gonna come up.
Right.
That's all I have. Is there anything else? Mike, you have anything else?
I don't, good meeting.
Elaine?
I don't.
So I guess a motion to adjourn. Does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
Move we adjourn.
Second?
They all want to